Of that, then I will call to order the Finance Committee meeting of Monday, April 11th, 2022, and ask Dave to please call the roll.
Council President Abbas.
Present.
Alder Carter.
Present.
Alder Verveer.
Here.
Alder Furman.
Present.
Alder Figueroa Cole.
Here.
Alder Curry. Mayor, you have quorum.
Thank you. Do we have meeting instructions?
Sure do. All right, welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members of the committee, if you're able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you're able, please activate your video when you're speaking. In this meeting, panelists have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Panelists also have the ability to add pronouns after their names if they choose. Please do not alter the current naming convention. Simply add text after your name. Please use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Staff, please use the raise hand feature when you're asked a question. The chair will do the best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. Staff will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Mayor, floor is yours.
Thank you. Our first item is general public comment. I believe you've all received the public comment report. We don't have anybody wishing to speak on item number 1. So we'll go to disclosures and recusals. Are there any disclosures or recusals on today's agenda from any members of the body? Seeing none. Then we will go to the consent agenda, and I will tell you first that we have a registrant wishing to speak on item 22. So we will exclude item 22 from the consent agenda. We will also exclude our closed session items, which are 26 and 27. And I believe we need to exclude item 25 as well. Are there any other disclosures, exclusions from the consent agenda on tonight's agenda? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. In addition to agenda item number 24, did you say we have comment on?
22.
Oh, excuse me, 22. I wanted to ask questions on 11 and 24. So 11, 22, and 24 were my list coming into the meeting.
11 and 24. Right. Alder Abbas.
Thank you. I heard 11 is already excluded. Perfect.
Yep.
Then it's all good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Any other items that alders wish to have excluded from the consent agenda? All right. At the moment, we've got items 11, 22, 24, 25, 26, and 27 excluded from the consent agenda. Last chance. All right. Then President Abbas, a motion, please.
Move motion to adopt consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second to adopt.
Thank you. It's moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda with the recommendations on those items. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of the consent agenda. And we will go then first to item 11. which is Legistar 70583, amending the adopted capital budget for the Economic Development Division to accept a Department of Administration Neighborhood Investment Fund grant for the Madison Public Market. On item 11, let's first get a motion, please, President Abbas.
Move motion to adopt.
Second to adopt.
Moved and seconded to adopt. Alder Verveer, you had questions?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. I actually have the same general question about agenda items 11 and 22, and that's the public market and the men's purpose-built homeless shelter, respectively. And that is if we could simply have updates from the relevant city staff as to the timing on each of those projects, assuming that these items are adopted by the Common Council at our next meeting. So perhaps starting with the public market, I guess it would be Matt Miklajewski and Matt Wachter. Perhaps I see Matt Miklajewski's offering to volunteer to run through the timeline for the public market, and of course curious when the men's shelter would need to relocate.
So Matt, do you want to speak to the public market? And there may be other folks that can speak to the shelter timeline here as well.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Alder Verveer. Regarding the public market schedule, we are aiming for starting construction on the public market by the end of the year, likely probably a November timeframe. And that I'll certainly let my colleagues speak more to the temporary men's homeless shelter, but the timing would likely work well with the temporary men's homeless shelter being able to move out of the First Street facility likely in early fall, and then us moving forward with the public market likely in November.
Thank you, Matt. Before we turn to someone to give us an update on the temporary men's shelter, could I ask you then how long is the construction period estimated to be? When do we anticipate optimistically that the public market might open?
It'll probably be a little over a year. So assuming that construction starts in November of this year, it's probably going to be first quarter of 24 when it's open.
Thank you very much.
Are there other questions on item 11? Alder Furman?
Yeah, Mayor, did I rudely interject? It looks like Jim is perhaps volunteering. He turned his camera on to mention the interim shelter move timeline.
Sure. Jim, do you want to answer that part of the question?
Yes, Mayor. The design work for the Zaya Road facility, and which would open the door for leaving First Street, is well underway, but we've been advised, and I don't know if anybody from city engineering is on the call, but we've been advised that the cost to complete that renovation exceeds the currently authorized budget. It is our intent to come to the council at its next meeting and present a resolution requesting a capital budget amendment, 2022 capital budget amendment, which would then come back to this body on the 25th of April. Pending approval, the design work would be completed by the end of April or very early May. Construction would begin shortly after that. All of this with the intent of departing First Street in September or October of this year.
Thank you, Jim. I see Brian Mayer has also engaged his camera. Brian, did you wish to add any detail to that response?
Well, Jim covered it. Thanks, Jim.
Alder Verveer, did you have other questions?
No, that'll be it. Thank you. And then I'll probably, as I say, Mayor, have similar questions on the next agenda, item 22, as relates to the permanent shelter. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alder. Alder Furman?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a question for Matt about the market. Matt, if we do see further delays with the temporary homeless shelter, due to lots of different things that could possibly happen. How much flexibility is there to start the project in the spring if unfortunately that's what we have to do with all this money tied? How much leeway do we have?
I think we would have some leeway, Alder. The NIF funding through ARPA dollars, there is, because they're ARPA dollars, some capacity to start a construction project a little later. Likewise, I think with the EDA, the current EDA funding that's before us, if it slipped a couple months into the spring, I suspect that would be okay.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Abbas?
Thank you very much. Matt, could you please speak a little more about EDA, where we are? What are the terms and conditions attached to that particular funding?
Yes, thank you, Alder. The EDA right now has made an offer to us, but it's not yet a formal offer. One of the things that we're working on now is actually how to pair the federal EDA funding with the federal ARPA funding. So we're working with the EDA right now and kind of identifying how those two funding sources would pair together. But we do anticipate, we're making good progress in that regard, and we anticipate that they'll be forthcoming with a formal letter very soon, now that we know that we have that NIF grant, which will now provide all the necessary funding to move forward.
And could you please also, Matt, give a little bit breakdown on funding? So if we get this money, EDA, then we also have some TIF. We don't need additional capital budget or anything else. Perhaps we could save some money, no?
I don't think we're going to save money on, like all capital projects at the moment. Construction costs are rising, but it would appear with this NIF funding coupled with TIF, the Public Market Foundation support, and the EDA support, it appears that we will have enough funding to proceed. So we likely won't need a budget amendment on the capital side, but I'm not sure we're going to save a lot of money just given construction costs.
I want to remain optimistic. So could you please also talk about operating cost of public market? What will be the role of the city?
The city won't have a role in the long-term operations of the public market. The city will retain ownership of the building. So as with all city buildings, there will be some responsibilities that the city will have towards the building. Other responsibilities related to the building will be that of the foundation. And we're currently working on the operating agreement of the lease that's going to specify those items that are city responsibilities versus foundation responsibilities. But outside of some general care and maintenance of the building itself, the city will not have an ongoing operating responsibility for the public market.
Okay, thank you.
Alder Figueroa Cole?
Thank you, Mayor. Hey, Matt, just to follow up on Alder Furman's question in regards to delays, you responded on the terms of months. So can you please clarify what would be a reasonable delay? Just really 2-3 months, or the 3 years that we need this permanent shelter for?
I mean, a 3-year delay, Alder, would be certainly too long. Both the NIF funding from the state and the EDA funding, the intent is to see those funds be used sooner rather than later, especially, actually both of them. So I think that showing that we're making forward progress and, a delay of a couple months is likely fine, but a 3-year delay would not be acceptable likely to either entity.
Thank you for the clarification. That's all I got.
Thank you, Alder. I believe for the neighborhood investment, we actually have to break ground this year, as is the desired time frame from the state. So it is a pretty tight time frame.
Thank you,
Alder Furman, questions?
Thank you, Mayor. I just apologize, ask questions for a second time, but President Abbas brought out something about the operating, and I just wanted to make sure that I was clear. Some of the previous funding that the market was looking for actually would have required us to keep the market going for a certain period of time. Are there any obligations like that with the current money that is being put towards the market that might require us to take over operating costs if there are issues there?
Yes, Alder, there will be some obligations relative to the EDA funding. The EDA is going to require that for a 20-year period that the facility is operated as a public market. Or there might be the need to repay some of that funding.
Okay, and obviously the EDA money is not in front of us this evening.
That's correct.
So we can have a longer discussion about that, we would be on the hook to make sure this market stays operational for 20 years if we accept those funds.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Alder Carter.
Just real quickly, along with the restrictions with the EPA, the ARPA money, I believe, has a deadline also, doesn't it? Mayor, I think you've mentioned 2023, but I could be wrong.
Yes, Alder, that's actually the funding that's before us is from the state's ARPA dollars.
Oh, the states, okay.
And they had put a slightly more stringent time frame than the federal government on it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or discussion on item 11? If not, the motion is to adopt. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of adoption? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of adoption with a big thank you to Governor Evers. And that will take us to item 22. Item 22 is Legistar 70582. Approving the selection of the property located at 1902 Bartillon Drive as a site for a permanent shelter facility serving men experiencing homelessness. Authorizing a competitive process to provide architectural and engineering design services. And a competitive process to select an operator for the facility. On item 22, we have one registrant wishing to speak, Jim Larson of District 12.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Jim Larson. I live over on Mendota Street, and I'm here to voice my concern about the city's plan to construct this facility for the homeless. On January 28th, 2021, Mayor Rhodes Conway and Dane County Executive Joe Parisi already announced that they had found a location for a permanent men's shelter. That was 2002 Zaire Road. This site already has a building. It's located 1,900 feet from the nearest residential property, and it already houses people, or is planned to, from what I can understand. 1902 Bartillon Drive is 450 feet from the nearest residence, and that's being quite generous. It has no building on it. It sits dangerously near Truax Field, as we all know, home of the F-35s, which are going to be splitting the ears of residents all over the east side. It does have a volleyball court, so that's a good thing. But the city needs to share the reports that brought them to the conclusion that moving the homeless population 2 times into a brand new building is a better option than moving them once into an existing structure, Zaire Road. I've only heard horror stories of the impact that that encampment population had on the east side. I'm just disappointed at the city's continued efforts to push their problems onto our side of town. That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for our registrant? Seeing none, then President Abbas, a motion on item 22, please.
Move motion to adopt.
Is there a second?
second.
Second to adopt.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Alder Revere, you had questions on item 22?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. So if Brian and or Jim could respond to the question that I posed with the last item relating to the timing of the purpose-built men's shelter as to when we might commence construction and when the shelter would be operational.
Yes, Alder, I can answer that. If that's okay with you, Jim. So like most, I guess called major facility projects at the city, we assume that will take, just based on timelines and experience, that it'll take approximately 3 years from the moment we're authorized to proceed with a project to the time that we could, the moment we could get an occupancy permit and people would not be allowed to use the building for its intended purpose. So if we started in July, if we got approval for the design contract to go find an architect and engineer in April of this year, if we added 3 years to that, that would be our intended date to have occupancy for the building at Bartolon.
Thank you, Brian. Do you have anything to add, Jim, on that question?
I don't, Alder Revere, no.
Thank you. And then if I could just ask one follow-up at this point, this would be for you, Jim. As of today, what's our plan in terms of selecting an operator for this site? If I could ask, would that be a RFP process? Is that what you envision as of today, or something different?
No, Alder Revere, whether it's an RFP process or an RFQ or request for qualifications, we're not quite settled on that yet, but we would be undertaking a competitive process, which we would expect to get underway this spring and bring back to the council a recommendation for an operator. Because we would like for that operator to be on hand and be part of the conversations around the design of the facility.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. And thank you, Brian, again. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Whaley, a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. Same question. Jim, the operator, would it be just one contractor or will be various contractor that will be taking this operation?
Alder, the operator for many, many years has been a single organization, but we certainly would not preclude in our RFP or RFQ process the possibility that a collaborative group might not come forward and put a proposal in front of us. So we would certainly be willing to consider that.
And along with that, do you have some criteria that you're looking into which agency you'll be choosing for this project?
Alder, we've begun the preparation of a request for proposals or request for qualifications document that would set those criteria forth. It's not completed, but certainly we'd be looking for an organization that that has some experience working with this population, demonstrated experience, an organization that has connections or partnerships with other entities in the community that might be useful in providing supportive services. We'd look for organizations that are committed to working with this population, either has some demonstration of having done that, or can speak to the special needs of the population that they would be asked to support. So we'll lay that all out in this RFQ document and make that as clear as we can, part of that process.
And will the council members be able to see those RFP or RFQ guidelines?
Yeah, we're certainly happy to share those and get feedback from those. I don't know if we would do that in any real structured way through a committee review or a council specific authorization to release that RFP, but we're certainly happy to take input and feedback from anybody interested in providing it.
Thank you. And my final question is, who will be in charge of evaluating those RFPs?
Like we typically do, Alder, we will assemble a review group. Certainly there will be city staff, community development staff. There will almost certainly be county staff. We intend to do this in concert with Dane County, as they are a partner in this endeavor. I would expect that we will reach out to include participation perhaps from the Homeless Services Consortium, but look for other community input into that process as well. And then again, this is a process that will yield a staff recommendation to the council. So ultimately it will be the Common Council that will make that decision.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Abbas?
Thank you very much. Jim, I want to share a couple of things and I want to get your input and then I will ask you a question. So LGBTQ community, transgender community, they don't feel safe in existing shelter, the way the accommodation is. Single father with kids cannot go in men's shelter, cannot go in Salvation Army shelter. And there are barriers with that too because of the way that things are set. So when we are going to create the design, I would really like to know how we can accommodate design thinking of services to those community who are basically doesn't feel welcomed in our shelter system, and how could we accommodate those? I'm just curious to hear during the architectural design if we can keep an eye on this design thinking of perhaps we need to create portions and perhaps we have to think more creatively rather than just a big floor and people are sleeping bed by bed, just like First Street or Warner Park, I remember, both. So I'm curious to hear your thinking around those questions.
Alder Abbas, I can tell you that from my perspective, we go into this really wide open in terms of concepts and approaches to this facility. We have a primary goal of doing everything that we can to reduce barriers to access. It's been one of the criticisms of shelter facilities in the past that they aren't available and usable by a good number of people in the community that need them and could use them. And that in large part has been a function of the limitations of the physical facilities. So expanding access and providing a more welcoming and accessible facility is really a primary goal of ours as we look to develop this facility. And we will be undertaking a pretty robust community engagement process that will seek input from community members, including and perhaps especially from people with experience with homelessness and with experience using shelter facilities. So I really look forward to that. I think it's one of the most important parts of this effort, and we don't go into this at all with any preconceived notions of what this facility will look like or how it will function.
Appreciate the answer, Jim. And regarding public outreach, I'm curious what is the timeline. I would be happy to connect some people with you who face those barriers and reach out to me. So I want to make sure I understand the timeline.
Alder Boss, so we've brought on a new staff position in community development. One of his primary roles will be to develop that engagement process. So it's not yet complete. I don't have a timeline, but it will certainly get started. Very soon after the council acts on this resolution, because it'll feed into the design work. It'll feed into the selection of an operator, and so we'll begin that. I would expect later this spring or the first part of the summer.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. Okay.
Other Carter questions?
Yeah, I have a couple questions, Jim. I know that, within our world, we've talked about purposeful shelters on many, 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 many occasions. When you start doing your outreach, and I know you went to, I believe, Minneapolis, but when you start doing your outreach, are you going to be able to define a purposeful shelter? And are you going to be incorporating some of the things that you saw when you guys did your trip to Minneapolis? Since we don't have one here.
Yeah, we certainly hope so, Alder Carter. When I talk about a purpose-built shelter, what I mean by that is that we first understand what functions we want to perform there, what uses will be made of it, and then build a facility to accommodate those uses. That's very different than trying to work out of a building like the basement of a church or like an old schoolhouse that wasn't built with that specific use in mind. And so the work that will be done around design and around function and programming, all of that will happen on the front end, and then it will inform how this building actually gets designed and ultimately how it will work. We will, we've all been to Minneapolis and St. Paul facilities. As recently as last week, we met virtually with the operators of a recently opened facility in Los Angeles. That's a little bit of a different approach to this, and I believe that we have brought on or are preparing to bring on an intern whose principal job will be to research facilities around the country and try to get some of the best practices and some of the lessons that have been gleaned from work around the country. So we're very much interested in learning from others and taking some of the best of what other communities have done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there any other questions on item 22? It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of item 22? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of item 22. And that will take us to item 24, which is Legistar 70344, creating sections of the Madison General Ordinances to create a resource recovery special charge. And let me just refresh and make sure. I do not believe we have anyone registered to speak on this. No, we have people available for questions, but no one registered to speak. So we'll go to questions for staff. Oh, I'm sorry. We have a presentation from staff first. So we'll do that and then we'll do questions for staff. Dave, are you starting?
Yeah, I'll share my screen and put the presentation up there. Can everyone see that? Okay, great. All right, so we'll walk through today the resource recovery special charge. Give you some background on it. Charlie Romines and I will hopefully cover most of the bases background on this special charge. All right, so first of all, give you the background on that this concept was incorporated and adopted in the 2022 budget. And what you have before you is the ordinance, and as well as there'll be a subsequent policy resolution. And that's the typical approach on implementing special charges. We'll talk a little bit about the city's recycling service, the cost of recycling, and how the ordinance will be implemented. So first of all, on the 2022 budget. So just a quick reminder, the budget you adopted back in November from the general and operating fund or general and library funds, 360.3 million. That was about a 9 million or 3.1% increase from the 2021 adopted budget. It relies on over $13 million of one-time American Rescue Plan Act funding to balance that budget. It also includes in it this new resource recovery special charge. At the time the budget was put together and adopted, it was called the sorting special charge. And that 1.5 million is a 6-month estimate from the charge, and the annualized amount would be $3 million. Just again, that budget that you adopted has funding allocated to implement the attachment of the town of Madison to the city, as well as violence prevention and public safety, affordable housing initiatives, and initiatives to diversify the city's workforce. The overall increase in the property tax levy was about a little over 1%. And again, that, as we'll talk in a little more detail, the rate of that increase is really dictated by state law, as well as how much our debt service is going up. And then our expenditure restraint, that's what ERP stands for, is we do have some room there because of increases in inflation, and that inflation is continuing. All right, this is just a quick reminder that was adopted in the 2022 budget. The right-hand side of the page just shows, if you look at the streets division budget on the city's website or in your physical budget, you will see this summarized as a special sorting special charge and the reason for it. And that revenue was included in the budget, and that was adopted by the council back in November. It was also referenced in the executive summary to the executive operating budget and was presented to the finance committee at the budget overview presentation in October of 2021. So again, just a reminder, the resource recovery charge was one of multiple actions to balance a significant gap in the 2022 budget. That gap was about $18 million and included expenditure reductions of about $1.4 million, revenue adjustments, including the sorting special charge or the resource recovery special charge of $1.7 million. But most of the budget was balanced through that one-time funding from the American Rescue Plan Act. Again, a reminder that in the face of the economic effects of the pandemic, we have had to rely on one-time funds to balance the budget, including $8 million for the 2021 budget, the $13.1 million in 2022, and we're expecting a budget gap for 2023 of about $18 to $20 million. And that reflects using the remaining ARPA funding as well as the remaining to 25 balance that has not yet been used. So the rationale for putting this special charge into place, again, these are, I think, reminders to many of you who've been through this process, but the city is heavily reliant on property taxes, and the rate of growth in those property taxes is strictly limited under state law by the state legislature. And when you put that together with our cost to maintain current services, we have a gap each year between what that property tax allows us to raise in revenue and how much we have to spend each year to maintain those services. So we have looked at special charges. A special charge for recycling is one of the few options available to cover a direct cost that the city provides through its services to its residents. It does take pressure off the general fund so that the general fund can fund other key priorities that the city has, that the council has, that may not be able to be covered through direct charges. As I mentioned earlier, it's $1.5 million that'll be raised in 2022 because it's the special charge obviously has not yet gone into effect. It needs this ordinance as well as the policy guidance and guidelines in terms of how the special charge will be allocated. And then the 2022 budget, again, I think as you all know, used almost all of that available increase in the levy that's allowed by the state mandated levy limit. So if the ordinance is not adopted, then the special charge cannot go into effect. And then we have a $1.5 million gap in our expected revenues in the budget that you adopted back in November. Again, just a reminder, and this really drives home, I think, the impact of that, of the levy limits on the city and how we're able to continue to provide services. We've used a number of budget balancing strategies for the last 10 years, 12 years, that range from utilizing the room tax, which is no longer an option to the city because of other state law changes. We've implemented an urban forestry special charge. We've increased certain revenues such as ambulance conveyance fees and building permits. We have managed to have surpluses in certain areas because of underspending. And in 2020, the local vehicle registration fee was implemented. We have shifted costs, for example, to the parking utility for parking enforcement, which is a challenging situation now because of parking utility revenues. And then we've looked at reductions. We used WorkShare in 2021 to help reduce costs and shift those costs to other sources, unemployment and so on. We looked at fee increases and then the American Rescue Plan Act, as well as the TID 25 surplus has been used most recently to balance the budget, as well as some reductions. All right, I'll turn it over to Charlie Romines to take us through the city's recycling service.
Thanks, Dave. My understanding is you're still driving here, so if you want to.
I'll just click through. Go ahead.
Yeah. All right. So our recycling service delivery model, there's really three buckets to think about. Two described pretty well here that we understand costs pretty well. They're fairly predictable. And then a third bucket, which is kind of the wild card. So the first bucket is really our costs to go and get recycling from the curb. That's going to be employee costs as well as the cost of our equipment. Those costs can go up over time. For example, right now our equipment costs are going up because of fuel costs are embedded in that, as well as our cost to acquire new equipment. So think of the automobile costs right now. We're not immune to that in the larger equipment. Those expenses are right around $2.3 million right now. And again, those are costs we know very well and are pretty predictable within a pretty tight band. Secondly, the second piece of the service delivery model, and again, one that we understand pretty well and can understand costs fairly well, is the material resource facility. Municipal resource facility, known locally as Pelletieri, a private company that we contract with to provide those services. That's where when we collect the carts from the curb, we take that over to Pelletieri on the east side. They sort through that material, figuring out what can go where as far as in the recycling markets, and then also sorting out residual garbage or trash that's in there, as well as material that could have been recycled, but for some other issue. Perhaps it got wet if it's cardboard, or it got dirty, things of that nature. So those are really kind of two of those buckets. That cost right now is right around $1 million, or I should say as of 2020, 2021 was right around $1 million a year. Go ahead, Dave. So here's a graph representation of some of the costs we've had in recent history. You'll see here that actually our costs for personnel have gone down a bit since 2016, which we in streets are certainly proud of. We've been more efficient there, but we have seen increases nonetheless. Primarily, you can see here driven through some contract costs, but also some fleet charges. That's going to be fuel costs going up, as well as some changes with how equipment purchasing's allocated. Also, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, our contract with Pelletieri was up at the end of 2021. We did go out for an RFP. Pelletieri was really the best bid we had, and we did go through some conversations with them on some options that would have continued something more akin to our previous agreement, which included a pretty heavy revenue share agreement, or what we went with, which I'll describe here in a moment. Go ahead, Dave. So this is that third bucket, really, of recycling costs. This is where, in very short periods of time, you can run across people saying that recycling is relatively cheap, or recycling is very, very expensive. Over time, our recycling revenues, certainly over the last few years, have not met revenue projections because the commodity market was significantly down. You had the China Sword Initiative, you had paper mills that had closed in the US, a lot of drags on the market, cheap oil for a long time. And if you look there, you'll see from early 18 through the first quarter of 2020, those are net expenses where we were actually cutting checks, rather sizable checks out to Pelletieri every month to cover the fact that there was not enough revenue coming in the commodity markets to cover our expenses to them. So it was really in this backdrop in 2019 that Pelletieri reached out looking for us to kind of rework the deal with them to move to increase tipping fees because they were struggling dealing with the commodity markets. And as you can see here, as we got into late 2018, 2019, early 2020, we were also, as a city, really struggling with the lack of revenue coming in from the commodity market. And then you'll see here the big spike in 2021. As soon as the most dire predictions came through, we had a once in 25-year freeze in Texas. We had a hopefully no more frequent than once in 100-year pandemic. And from what I can tell in the city, that's been good for two things, the golf enterprise and the recycling revenues. So essentially, the big spike in revenue you'll see here in 2021, in our conversations with Pelletieri, really what they were looking for, if we were going to continue through a heavy revenue share model, was to take our tipping fees to work with them from $50 a ton, which was, again, generating costs of about $1 million a year, to $100 to $110 per ton, which meant we were looking at between $900,000 and $1 million more of guaranteed expenses in order to play this game of roulette with revenues. So we would have had to come up with essentially $1 million more in the budget to hope revenues stayed high. Go ahead, Dave. So instead of that, we chose to go with a different model where essentially we backed out of the revenue share and essentially took a chunk of that revenue and said, Pelletieri, you can take that revenue and that will be your incentive to go find new markets for our recyclables. And we will take a portion of that in guaranteed lower expenses. And so instead of our tipping fee going from $50 a ton to $100 or more, it was backed out to about, to $32 a ton, essentially. So that delivered a savings to our bucket of costs that we know well, right? You've got the equipment and employee bucket, you've got the MRF bucket, and then you've got that crazy bucket that was in that graph. We're essentially out of that game now. We've taken the revenue from that and brought it into savings in our Pelletary bucket. So what that really means is our cost to work with Pelletary, instead of being in that $1 to $1.2 million range, will be dropped by $400,000 or more per year. So instead of seeing costs increase for recycling for 2022 and beyond of probably in the order of $600,000 to $1 million, we were able to hold that cost increase down to about $200,000. The other thing it allows us to do then is to budget and plan in those two bucket areas that we're actually pretty good at understanding costs, which should prevent us from getting into situations where we have really large revenue shortfalls and Dave and his staff have got to go scrambling for money to figure that out, or situations where we have a whole bunch of revenue that we weren't expecting, and maybe some decisions were made in the budget that weren't needed to have been made. So I'm not going to read the slide here. You can kind of see what some of those trade-offs are in the expense profile, but we can certainly answer questions on that later. Go ahead, Dave. So recycling costs, and I would point to this slide also as the reason why, more than just semantics, why we shouldn't really call this a recycling special charge or recycling anything. Right now it is focused on curbside recycling, but there are other costs that are certainly resource recovery driven that could be eligible for future inclusion if that becomes desirable. Certainly does not have to be, but it could. For right now, we're looking at our $2.3 million for our cost to grab recycling from the curb. Again, that range of expense probably closer in the order of $630,000 to $700,000 this year of MRF expense due to that change that I just went through with our MRF contract. And then about $100,000 a year we spend on recycling cart costs that aren't reimbursed. And then again, you can see those other considerations which are not included currently, but again, may be chosen to be considered in the future. Go ahead, Dave. So without getting too far into the road of what the policy may look like, we were handed a request to come up with a $3 million special charge, annualized $3 million, $1.5 million for this year. So essentially, what we really wanted to do was make sure that we kept it as affordable as we could, and then also did not disincentivize recycling. And I believe when we come back with the policy, you'll see some more details on how we've done that. But essentially, what we're going to be proposing is a flat rate for residential units, looking back to the resolution in 2010 that came from council that stated who we serve. That's who we're focusing on serving going forward. So we're looking at those single family homes through 8 units, and then also small businesses. We're going to focus that special charge on a per dwelling unit charge. So not the amount of pounds, not the number of carts, not the size of carts. That would all disincentivize recycling. And in truth, our marginal cost per pound of recycling is extremely low. And so once you factor in kind of those costs that are baked in, it wouldn't make sense to do that. So with that residential unit cost with carts for the small businesses, we're anticipating a fee per month to be right around $4.10 per customer. So again, that would be per dwelling unit or per cart for a business that would be recycling with us.
All right, thanks, Charlie. So we thought we'd take that and just give you a sense of the impact on an average household. As Charlie said, that estimated special charge per household is about $4.10, may range to $4.30. It all depends in the end how the charge is finally allocated. The special charges be effective beginning July 1st of this year. And so for the year, it would be about $25. Annualized would be about $50 per year. It's about a 2.6% increase to the average municipal services bill, maybe a little bit higher. When you look at the average customer, now this is annually what they pay on that municipal services bill. It's a little over $1,000 with about 359 of that, the water bill. So this is the bill that if you have water, sewer, and storm water service, you're getting that bill each month. This is the annualized amount. So water, about $359, sewer, a little over $400, the stormwater charge, a little under $136, the urban forestry special charge, a little under $74. There's a landfill special charge that's about $6 for the year. And that resource recovery charge that was adopted in the 2022 budget, and its implementation and ordinances before you today and will be before the council. That 6-month amount will be about $25.80, and then annualize about $50. This just gives you a sense of the taxes and fees and charges that are paid basically by most residences each year, and just compares those amounts for 2021 to 2022. And so that tax, that property tax on the average value home, now this is just the city government property tax. This does not include the county or the school district or the technical college district, which are also on that property tax bill that each property owner receives. This is just the city tax, and I think you're familiar with this number. We talk about it when the budget's presented and when you adopt the budget. That went up about 1.9%. There is the vehicle registration fee, again, paid by most residences. That is $40. That did not change from one year to the next. The average sort of water bill on a residence, that's $359. That is not going to change other than possibly for usage, but the rate is not changing in 2022. Sewer is going up about 6%, stormwater about 2.6%. And the council, I believe, adopted a resolution at its last meeting to make those changes to the annual sewer and stormwater rates. The urban forestry, that's going up about 4.6%. The landfill remains unchanged. And then this new resource recovery special charge would add that $25.80 for 2022 at that 6-month level. So you have about a 2.9% increase in this bundle of taxes, special charges, and fees that most residences in the city pay. Again, just a reminder that the property tax levy that the council adopted back in November was the lowest increase in 20 years, a little over 1%. And that's well below that 20-year average of about 4.1%. And then taxes on the average value home, so translating that property tax levy to the average value home, went up about 1.2%. That average value home, which comes from the assessor's office, is an assessment of about $335,000. And you can see that tax on the average value homes, that 1.2% increase, again, well below the 3.2% average over the past 20 years. So that is a quick look at background on the budget and the resource recovery special charge proposal and the recycling program. And I know both Charlie and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave and Charlie. Appreciate it. We will go back to Alder Verveer first for questions, and then we have a queue.
Thank you, Mayor. You're very kind to remember a list from the beginning of the meeting. Thank you. So I don't know which one of you gentlemen wish to answer this, and of course, it goes without saying, thank you for the presentation, Dave and Charlie. But given that we have received a large number of concerned contacts from constituents, as I know the mayor has as well over the last week or so, and a lot of discussion on neighborhood listservs and the Nextdoor app and so forth on this. One of the main arguments, of course, is that it would disincentivize recycling, which we know is required by law and so forth, and that was addressed in your presentation in some respect. Could you elaborate on why in the I'll say at this point in the introduced 2022 executive operating budget, and then of course the adopted budget, that this was pursued in terms of really getting at recycling special as a new special charge as opposed to refuse? So why recycling over refuse, I guess, is my question to start out with.
I'll take a stab at that, Alder Verveer, and then maybe Charlie can add to it. But if the city were to pursue a refuse charge, in effect, a garbage collection fee, it would have no net effect on revenues to the city. Under state law, there are a handful of what are called covered services that if a city creates a charge or a fee to pay the cost of that service, and that has been formerly funded by the property tax, this community's levy limit has to be reduced dollar for dollar by the amount of that fee revenue. And garbage collection is one of those covered services, but recycling and related types of or resource recovery services are not one of those covered services.
Thank you. Well, that certainly goes to the heart of the question, Dave. Thanks for responding. We simply couldn't do it and help balance our budget, obviously. Then the next question I have, I'll keep with you, Dave, and that is I've had both constituents and actually some council colleagues ask what the options might be if we do not adopt this ordinance, what the options would be to fill the 2022 budget gap in our operating budget. Could you elaborate a little further on how much estimated revenue we're expected, which I guess is $1.5 million if this is implemented in July, and what our options, if any, might be? Is it simply, for example, to say we'll have to depend on the fund balance to fill the gap in our budget?
Alder Verveer, this is both a short-term issue in the 2022 budget and a long-term issue. And we've talked many times in this committee and the council of the city's structural gap. And I tried to allude to that in the presentation between the revenue growth that we get, and which is very limited, both under the state levy limits as well as our own source revenues do not really grow from year to year. And in order to maintain the service level that the city, I think, expects, its residents expects, we have to turn to other revenues. We've turned to revenues such as the urban forestry special charge or the vehicle registration fee. And in this case, it's the resource recovery special charge. So the extent to which that this does not go into effect, it's not just the $1.5 million this year, it's $3 million in 2023. And then layered on top of that is the fact that the 2022 budget does rely quite a bit on one-time funding from the American Rescue Plan. So it's not an easy answer to your question. I think this is things like the resource recovery special charge and other measures that council has taken in past budgets are really what allows current level of services to continue. So I think not proceeding with this means possibly having to look at that level of services and what can be presented and what is sustainable from the city's tax base and revenue base and so on. I don't have a specific list. I think the the council and the mayor struggled with balancing the 2022 budget. And, you know, if I don't see a lot of other revenue options, and you might have to look at reductions in some way, shape, or form, either short-term to get through 2022. Fund balance is a short-term option, yes, and there are other short-term options, but that really does not speak to or address those long-term issues that I think we've talked about many times in this forum, as well as in front of the council.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. Appreciate that. My next question is one that Charlie has heard before, so I don't know if Charlie, you want to address this, or Dave, or perhaps even Assistant City Attorney Doran Visti, who is the one that I know is recommending the fact that we clearly have to adopt the ordinance for the proposed resource recovery special charge prior to adopting the policy. But could one or some of you elaborate further on why we couldn't adopt the ordinance and the policy at the same council meeting? And if that still is the case, which I presume it is, as you and I have talked privately, Charlie, to that extent, is it possible for you to share with the council as quickly as possible a draft policy that perhaps would be introduced from the floor or introduced at the council meeting on April 19th?
Alder Rivera, this is Doran Visti. Just to answer your question, so the way the charge is set up is it has to be established by the council first, which is the ordinance. And then that directs the creation of the policy. And you know, ordinances take 10 days to become effective. So we would have this weird limbo where you'd have a policy in place where it's not tied to the ordinance yet. That's kind of why we have them structured with a gap. The plan would be to introduce the resolution with the policy after the council adopts the ordinance. But that is the actual mechanism that would create the charge. So even if the council approves the ordinance here today, unless the council approves the policy and sets the charge, there still is nothing that actually goes on people's bills. So the actual decision about what would go on people's bills would be tied to that policy and the resolution approving the charge itself. That's how we've done annually. For example, we do the resolution for the mall concourse special charge. We also do one for urban forestry as well, which are the two big special charges. So those are done by separate acts of council each year. And so that would be how it's scheduled, how it's set up. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and indeed it does, Doran. Thank you very much. And obviously we're familiar with the annual resolutions for those special charges that we consider each year. So is it your advice, Doran, that assuming the ordinance is adopted at the next council meeting or whenever it would be adopted, that we would wait until publication and then only introduce the policy as a separate resolution, or might we, would it be permissible to introduce the policy resolution at the next council meeting and not take action on it beyond introduction?
I suppose the policy document could reference the under consideration ordinance. There's enough of a gap between council meetings that you wouldn't run into the publication issue. So that is that by the time the council would meet again, the previous ordinance would be in effect. So ultimately, as long as they're not acted on at the same meeting, I think that could possibly work. We'd just have to update the policy a couple times in the process to reference the actual adopted ordinance, things of those natures.
Thank you. Yeah, and there certainly is a gap. I believe our next council meeting is until May 10th after the April 19th meeting.
Yeah, it'd be a bigger problem if there was a meeting every week. You know, the rare occasions where they bump into each other, but I don't think that's the case anymore.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then my next question, and I certainly recognize that many colleagues are seeking recognition, so I'll try to be quick and cut my list of questions down to maybe one or two left this round. And the next one would be why I think it is important that to provide comfort to the council and to our constituents that we do have that policy document available, at least as a draft, So if I could ask you, Charlie, or I should say team leader, and congratulations as our newly minted Public Works team leader. Happy for you and your well-deserved bonus that we adopted tonight on the consent agenda. Could you make that document available sooner rather than later, Charlie? Is it pretty much already prepared? And I'll just give you one quick illustration. My notes from the budget deliberations last October at the Finance Committee is that we estimated that the anticipated special charge would be $3 a month for the average city household. Obviously, as we've crunched the numbers since last fall, it's now risen to $4.10. And so I just think it would be helpful to provide a little more predictability for policymakers as we consider this ordinance to actually see in writing beyond the PowerPoint presentation this evening what the estimated cost will be and so forth, Charlie, because the fiscal note doesn't give that specific, for example, for the ordinance as to what the estimated average household cost will be on the municipal services bill. So is that policy document something that you could share with the council sooner rather than later in draft form at least?
Thank you. I appreciate it. The opportunity to be the team lead in Public Works, and I thank the mayor for her trust in me to take that on. Two, the policy is very nearly done. Dorn and I have been back and forth a couple times on that. So I think from a staff position, it's pretty close to being ready to share if that is what's desired. And I can certainly understand that reasoning. And just for folks to understand why the charge, we had originally hoped it would be in that 3 to maybe 3.25, 350 range. So why is it 4 or perhaps a little bit above? The Streets Division had never needed nor cultivated a customer list. So the assumption had always been it was around 70 to 75,000 customers, if you will. And we have now completed the work and coming up with our customer list, and that number is much more in the order of around 63,000. So that's why the difference.
Thank you, Charlie. And then I promise my last question, and I'll admit it's parochial, but as you know, in our private conversations about this, Charlie, I've talked about the unique circumstances of the core downtown area in terms of where our recycling services are provided, where the vast majority of my constituents, including I'll acknowledge where my residence is, uses private recycling services because these are large multifamily apartment and condominium buildings, and in most respects, certainly you do see some green recycling carts downtown. So I don't want to say that you don't provide any recycling services to the core downtown area. But anyway, with that said, could you just go over one more time that the intent of the ordinance and then the policy that would we would see sometime soon that would need to be adopted by the council as well would absolutely make it clear that the municipal service special charge would only be imposed on those municipal services bills that clearly are eligible and receiving Streets Division recycling services.
Yeah, following you there. I believe what you're saying is correct. We are not going to be levying a resource recovery special charge if we are not collecting the recycling. So if you are a large complex, so that let's say is defined something larger than 8 units, and you have a private hauler, you would not then also be charged the special charge.
Thank you. And then the quick follow-up, of course, is about the Parks Division mall maintenance, something that you're intimately familiar with in your prior career in the leadership of our Parks Division. We had discussed, of course, those that are in the mall maintenance area, the State Street Mall Capitol Concourse area, and the fact that so many of those businesses, most of which are small mom and pops, do receive their refuse and recycling service from mall maintenance and are already paying the special charge for mall maintenance. They if I could just get you on the record sharing, saying what you said to me in a private conversation, that indeed those folks would not receive, in effect, double billing for two different special charges.
So we got a meeting with Parks, in fact, later this week for them specifically to talk about mall maintenance and recycling and making sure that they're able to handle recycling, particularly where carts aren't involved. And assuming that goes the way I assume it will go, I don't think it would make sense, because for those that aren't familiar, one of the things that mall special charge already covers is trash and recycling the other 6 days of the week. So we want to make sure we're mindful of that. And in the few instances where these charges could overlap. So we're aware of that, and we want to make sure we're treating those businesses fairly.
Thank you. Charlie, please keep me posted in that regard. And congratulations, team leader. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole, questions?
I just have a quick question for Dave. Can you clarify the fee again? Is that a flat fee or is that based on the water usage? Seem you have a
Which fee? The special charge, or?
the special charge?
That would be a flat amount, at least at this point. I think Charlie can answer that a little better than I can, but it'll be a flat charge.
The slide had like a 413 something or whatever.
That's just it's a range of an estimate. So it's not a range of what would be charged.
All right, thank you. That's really, so we haven't really established the final dollar amount, sounds like. Charlie?
I didn't catch the last.
Actually establish a final dollar amount or not?
Well, until the policy is actually adopted, we want to be careful not to assume that the policy that I and we will be proposing is 100% what you all will adopt. So we're trying to leave some fudge factor, if you will, in there, depending on if there's some movement alders want to see in that. And then also there's just a little bit trying to make sure we have any expenses water utility has for adding it to the bill in there. That's why there's that little bit of play in there, but it will be a flat charge. It will not be based on anything other than just a flat charge.
Thank you. That's all I got for now.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Miadze, questions?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I was actually doing a little research on recycling, and I saw that a lot of cities had something that's called pay as you go. Mm-hmm. And I was just wondering if this didn't get passed, something that will be equitable upon everybody having a flat fee. Is that something you guys might have looked at? Something that I think Portland, Oregon has, even Fitchburg's got it.
Sure. Pay as you throw is certainly something that certain municipalities use. It is generally a disincentive to recycle. You'll typically see more recycling wind up in the trash, right? If I pay nothing to put it in the trash, but if I have to pay per bag to pay as I throw, that's going to create a disincentive to recycle, and we really didn't want to introduce anything that might do that. So that's why we didn't go down pay as you throw. That's why we're not doing it based on cart size, why we're not doing it based on number of carts for residences, because those just start bleeding into people saying, well, if I get a smaller cart or fewer carts, I'll just stuff more in my trash and I'll avoid some of the special charge.
So you really don't think it's that it's the exact opposite, where people will actually try to reserve more, recycle, instead of throwing away too much, because it's actually by what you throw away?
Alder, you're conflating two things. The pay as you throw policies are usually on trash, not on recycling.
Oh, okay.
So it does in fact incentivize, if you can charge on trash, it does in fact incentivize to recycle, to take your organics out, to minimize your trash as much as possible. We cannot do, as Dave discussed earlier, we cannot do a charge on trash without essentially losing money. So our only option is to do a fee on recycling and those related charges, which would have the impact that Charlie is describing.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor.
Of course. Alder Abbas, questions?
Thank you very much. So Charlie, just want to, I know I understood the presentation, your question very well, but for my constituent, the question I will still ask so they can also hear the answer. So what you are saying, if there's a 4-unit multifamily, they have to pay per unit regardless, they only use at this moment only 1 recycling bin or 2, but they have to pay 4, correct?
Right, it would be based on the number of dwelling units, 4-unit, 8-unit, correct.
If somebody have an income hardship, I understand in our state statute with the property tax, you don't have any other way around, but if somebody have income hardship or providing naturally offering affordable housing, providing affordable rate for multifamily 8-unit, 4-unit building, is there any way they can negotiate or talk to the staff? Sorry, my doctor just came from daycare.
Understandable for sure. I think that would be something that council will have to make provisions for. Ultimately, we have revenue targets that we have to hit. So if there's going to be some type of there's a desire for some type of a program where there can be a hardship allowance, something along those natures, that would certainly be beyond for me to decide. So if there was a program to be put in place to be administered, I mean, I'm not opposed to that, but that's not something.
Alder, if I could intervene, this is a question that gets brought up a lot. That would be regards to affordability of municipal service bills. Generally, if the council were to fund some other pot of money that could go towards, say, for example, somebody's low-income person's bill, that would be one way to do it. But you can't necessarily do that through the rate itself. You can't charge people different rates for the same service that their neighbor gets, just based upon income levels. It gets very complicated, may undermine the legality of the charge itself and our apportionment method. So if the council would fund some other, say, a grant program, for example, where that money could then go to pay off those charges, that would be one way to do that. That would probably pass legal muster, but it gets to be complicated on those issues. And it's best to avoid setting rates based upon factors like that, which are hard to rationalize if we were to be challenged.
I mean, you're doing, as we are talking this, Alder Figura will mention about the water charge, which also indication how much household you are and how much water you're using. Is it possible to make it more progressive this and attach with something like that with the water charge?
Well, I mean, the water rates are based upon consumption levels.
I understand. I'm just asking about making it more progressive than regressive or flat structure. Is there any creative way? I was just throwing an idea. Do you have any?
I mean, there's certainly no one way to apportion the charge. There could be lots of reasonable, rational ways for the council staff to come up with a way to apportion it. So I suppose there could be a way you could do something like that, but it's something that staff, when we were discussing the proposed policy, that is just something that we didn't feel like worked, and it definitely gets into more of the disincentivizing recycling concept.
So I think so it incentivizes using less water then. See, so there is incentive if you attach, but anyhow, that's more into comment.
Well, sure, that's done, by making rates, rates get higher the more consumption you do. For recycling, if you use more consumption, that I'm not sure you could say that they're using less of a service. So it gets a little bit usual there. I think that's kind of the point Charlie was trying to get to.
Right. And Dave, I have one quick question for you. So I know a follow-up to Alder Verveer's question. So in case if council won't adopt this ordinance and that $1.5 million is still a gap, can ARPA money be used? Pivot some ARPA money here? cover the gap?
There is ARPA money that has not yet been allocated. I will say, though, that that will make the 2023 budget gap that much worse.
So it can be used, but there are consequences for the
There
next.
are consequences, that's correct.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. No more further questions.
All right, are there any other questions? Alder Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just I think two quick ones. One is I think just a confirmation. This is so for those households that meet the criteria, so less than sort of 8-unit buildings, there would be no option to opt out completely either, correct? It would just be if you're a dwelling unit in the city, you would get the charge.
What will be on the suggested policy, if you are 8 units or less, there would not be an opt-out mechanism. That's kind of our core constituency that we provide service to. So we would not be looking to provide opt-outs for 8 units or less. And even then, for anyone who would opt out, by state and local law, they still have to recycle, which means they're still going to incur the cost of a private hauler.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Just wanted to confirm because that's been a question I've been getting from some folks. And then the other one, I don't know, maybe this is for Dave or Doran. Some folks are feeling a little hung up on the terminology. This kind of came up for us when we had the vehicle fee, and some folks feel like we're being sneaky by calling it a special charge. Could somebody just, in a nutshell, explain the difference between a tax, a fee, and a special charge, just so that we understand why we're using that terminology here?
I'll start, and I'm sure Doran will correct me, but so, a tax is something basically broad-based that's levied. It might be levied on property or on a service. A fee is usually for some sort of service provided. And the registration fee, for example, is named as such. Really a fee for the ability to, use the state and local transportation system. And that's how it is named in the statute. It is a local vehicle registration fee. It's colloquially called a wheel tax. And then a special charge is we have a cost for a certain type of activity, and we then allocate that charge in some fashion back to those that either benefit from the activity or receive that service directly. Or Doran, you have another version, but I think that's probably the distinction generally between the three.
Yeah, I mean, a tax is a more broad way for a governmental entity to raise revenue. The city of Madison is only authorized to do a tax for property. Obviously, Dane County can also do a sales tax. The state of Wisconsin has additional taxes. So we're very limited in our taxing authority. A special charge is unique. It's a way for us to recover the actual costs of providing a specific service to a property. The easiest example would be if somebody doesn't shovel their sidewalk and we have to send work crews out. We do that work and we do a special charge back to the property for that work. A fee for the city, that's usually recovered by us when we perform something, and it's just a way for us to recover our costs of doing that service. Building inspection fees, for example, that would be the cost of the inspector going out and doing that work, or for us to review an application for something, we charge fees to provide those specific services. The special charge here would be recovering the city's costs to send the trucks out, pick up recycling, and then eventually have it sorted and recycled. So there is a line, and we're always conscious of it. If a charge isn't designed properly, it can become an unlawful tax. So that's something that we're conscious of when we draft the ordinances along these lines. There is statutory authority here that supports the specific charge, though.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the explanations and the presentation today.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Carter, questions?
Just a real quick one. Earlier, I believe, Charlie, you said that this tax would be on single homes up to 8 units and small businesses. Is that correct?
The special charge would be.
I mean, charge.
Yep. The policy we'll be proposing would be focused on our core constituency, which is really single family through 8 units. And there are approximately 800 or 900 small businesses we provide recycling services for. So it'd be focused there.
And even though this charge will appear on your water bill, it has nothing to do with your water utility bill, just like the special forestry.
Yeah, the water utility doesn't like it being called the water bill. They like it be called the municipal services bill because there's so much on there.
There is a lot on there, that's for sure.
Right, right. There's a lot on there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions for staff on this one? All right, so we need a motion on item 24, President Abbas.
Move motion to adopt.
Second to adopt.
Moved in second to adopt item 24. Is there discussion? Alder Miadze?
I just wanted to say that when this was adopted, when this budget was adopted, I think a lot of people, just like residents now, were under the pretense that, oh, we're just sorting out trash, and we definitely, because of the environmental aspect of it, making sure that, you know, the landfill doesn't fill up and that we're recycling better. It's almost like the same thing with the real tax. I think we have to do a better job in getting the information out, making sure that everybody's clear on what the wheel tax is for, just like the recycling that's going to be hitting residents that, you know, they can barely afford. So I think we just have to be a better job being transparent to our the city and getting the information out. So I don't know how when we put things out there, I think it's important that we put it in simplified terms that everybody is able to understand. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Abbas?
Thank you very much. So the district I represent and the constituent I represent, Truex Apartments, the home, the shelter is in my district. A lot of affordable housing, Section 8 projects, Section 32, single family homes, people living, retired people living paycheck to paycheck on their Social Security. Just a brief history as well. I oppose the wheel tax as well because it was regressive in its nature, and I will never support any regressive policy which disproportionately impact the low income people. And this particular policy, as well as the fee, is regressive in its nature. It's not progressive by any means. There are ways to be progressive, but those have not been looked at. I was asking question about with the water bill, thinking more creatively, but from what I'm hearing from the staff is there are much more complication. And if we cannot create progressive policies, then I cannot really vote for something which is regressive in its nature. I also understand the city have a tough budget situation, and I think so we need to set our priorities right. And this particular one is definitely not a message we want to, I at least as Alder want to send to my constituent who are already suffering through COVID relief, and also with the job market and with the expense of electric bill, energy bill, wheel tax, and other tax. It's really hard for me to vote for something which is regressive in its nature. And I also think so. I encourage my colleagues to also vote it down, and let's use the ARPA to figure $1.5 million. There is a path forward. It's not like there is no path. In 2023, I think so as a council, we need to sit down together and work with the mayor office and reevaluate our priorities where we are spending the money. So thank you.
Alder Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Just two quick comments, and I mean, it is it is difficult to vote for it, but I certainly feel like it's our best path forward. One is just wanted to reinforce what Alder Revere mentioned, which is if it's possible to have a draft of the policy available while we're actually taking this, that would be helpful just to have kind of as much detail as possible. And then two, I thought the presentation today and the discussion was really, really good. And if possible, perhaps we could put together the presentation and maybe the video recording and put out even as a press release or somewhere where we can link to it, because I think it will really help a lot of residents better understand kind of what's being proposed and the rationale behind it. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Is there any further discussion on item 24? Seeing none, I would just invite all alders and certainly all members of the Finance Committee to consider finding the between $1.5 and $3 million that is implicated by this particular charge. We're certainly going to need it in the next budget. So, and just encourage you to put your thinking caps on and to be innovative about how we can reduce our costs if we're not willing to support raising funds. Is there objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of item number 24? Alder Abbas, you wish to be noted as voting no?
I will request a roll call vote, please.
A roll call has been requested. So all those in favor, aye. Those opposed, no, as your name is called. And I'll ask Dave to call the roll.
Council President Abbas,
No.
Alder Carter,
I believe Alder Carter may have had to leave.
Alder Revere,
Aye.
Alder Furman,
Aye.
Alder Figueroa Cole,
Aye.
Alder Curry,
Aye.
Mayor, that's 4 ayes, 1 no, 1 absent.
Yeah, with 4 ayes, the item passes, and that takes us to item 25, which is a discussion on the meeting format for the 2022 Finance Committee. I believe that we had, last time we talked about this, we agreed through the end of this month to stay virtual, and we did not specify beyond that. So we need to make a decision and specify at least for the next quarter, I would suggest, if not further out, so staff can prepare and the public can have some certainty about where we will be. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Mayor. A question for you, if you know, otherwise possibly IT. If we decided our next finance meeting would be in person, or there are the pieces in place to do a hybrid option. And I say that knowing that the hybrid option is not actually defined. But if we asked for a particular, whether it's public comment or a public registrants or staff or alders to be virtual and certain people in person, is that possible immediately?
Alder, I believe that staff does not want me to commit them to that until June. But I think in June, it is likely that the technology would be in place. We do not yet have, potentially by then we could have the policy in place to manage hybrid meetings. But it just in terms of the sheer technology, the room availability, I think we wouldn't want to plan on anything before June.
That helps. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought that what we had decided was to follow the lead of the council.
Although we had discussed that, but I believe, and Dave can correct me, I believe that we just specified through either through April or into May. I can't remember. I admit I can't remember the exact date. Dave, do you have clarity on that?
I'm hoping Christine is able to, but I think you have to do it in advance under the rules that you set up, at least 1 or 2 meetings in advance. And so I think that's where we're at. Christine?
I'm just looking up the meeting minutes from the last time this was discussed. I believe that there was discussion about lining up with the council calendar, but the decision was to defer the conversation to this meeting instead. So no decision was made at the time.
Thank you.
I believe that's right. Thank you, Christine.
I'm sorry, I'm not able to contribute, so I'm just gonna wait and see what everybody else comes up with.
Thank you, Alder. So there's the background. Would anyone like to make a motion or a suggestion, Alder Furman?
This is something that's obviously very, I have a lot of strong feelings about, but I think until the room is ready, obviously, we need to continue, in my opinion, to stay virtual and not try to just do an in-person without hybrid. And so my suggestion would be for our meeting on the 25th and the 16th that we continue to be virtual and that we have a discussion on the 16th, on May 16th on, what is hybrid. Hopefully we have a little bit more info on the policy. I know, Mayor, that's something that that you and I have talked about, and I know that's something IT is working on. But I think hopefully in the meeting on the 16th we can have an opportunity as finance to make some decisions on what we want that to look like. But obviously, I don't think we should go back in person until the room is at least ready technology-wise for some hybrid options. So motion to do our next two meetings virtual and discuss it at our meeting on May 16th. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Is there a second for that motion? Alder Figueroa Cole will second that. Thank you. So the motion on the floor is to do the next two finance committee meetings virtually and then to revisit. Discussion on that, Alder Abbas.
Thank you very much. I'm okay with that motion, but I just want to remind my colleague is what I was hearing from the council is the reason the hybrid is ideal because of public engagement, public process. During the finance committee, I acknowledge sometimes we get public comment, but most of the time we're doing beside budget, taking care of things where we are as a committee. I think so it's very important for us to come back in person. And I have say that many other time, while the Common Council is still working on a hybrid, I extremely believe there are a lot of benefits, which I don't need to repeat myself again. And I will encourage us with this motion when we next time discuss, we should come back as soon as possible in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Curry.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I have a question. My recollection was that the council agreed to go virtual through May. So is the date that was considered for that, does it fall before our next, or the 16th, the meeting on the 16th?
Alder, the council has not made any move to do anything other than being virtual at this point in time, somewhat to my chagrin.
Okay, I thought we were reconsidering in May, but I may be wrong.
I think I believe, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that they've just been putting the dates on the agenda to give you all a chance to change it if you wanted to. But I think they're just rolling the dates forward. I'm not 100% sure of that. Alder Furman, did you have a thought on that or want to weigh in on that?
And so I can tell you on our last agenda, our last council agenda, it does define the meetings on the 19th of May, 19th of April, the 10th of May, and the 24th of May as virtual. And I do remember Alder Foster did make a motion at our council meeting to be all inclusive of those dates until the end of May, and that's what we decided. So our meeting on the 16th, when we would discuss it, May 16th here, we still would be signed up to be virtual for the following council meeting. But I'm hoping obviously that we'll be in a better place understanding the technology and some of the policy work that's put into that on May 16th. And we can talk more about virtual versus in-person versus hybrid. I do want to point out hybrid is, to me, at least in this format, even if we don't have a lot of registrants, in my opinion, we've got a ton of staff that shows up to this meeting. For the alders that didn't participate in finance when we were in MMB, it's quite remarkable to see the shuffling out of that room after we passed the consent agenda. So I do think, when we're talking about hybrid, especially when it comes to finance, we should be very focused on the fact that we have a lot of staff that show up here, and their ability to be virtual, I think, would be very important.
Thanks, Alder, for refreshing my memory, and Alder Curry, my apologies for misleading you. All right, the motion on the floor is to have our next two Finance Committee meetings remain virtual, then to revisit the question. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of that motion? Seeing no objection, we'll record a unanimous vote in favor of that motion. And that will take us to items 26 and 27, which are closed session items. President Abbas, would you please take us into closed session?
Yep, I will move motion to go in a closed session. And closed session is when the Finance Committee consider the following matters. It may go into a closed session pursuant to section 19.851E Wisconsin statute, which reads as follows. Deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting or other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. If the Finance Committee does go into closed session, notice is hereby given pursuant to section 19.852 Wisconsin statute that it may reconvene in open session without waiting 12 hours as specified in the statute.
So that's a motion to go into closed session. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Alder. This is a roll call vote. All those in favor of going into closed session, aye. Those opposed, no. As your name is called, then I'll ask Dave to call the roll.
Council President Abbas,
Aye.
Alder Carter, Alder Verveer,
Aye.
Alder Furman,
Aye.
Alder Figueroa Cole,
Aye.
Alder Curry.
Aye.
There, that's 5 ayes and 1 absent.
Thank you. So we'll be moving into closed session. As we do
Recording
so,
stopped.
Attorney Haas was don't want to be streaming when we go into closed session.
Right. So is 27
Both, yeah, 27 and 26 are both closed session items. Sorry.
my fault? Okay.
That's okay.
Sorry about that.
All right.
So I'll bring the report out of closed session on item 26. We received a briefing on the status of bargaining, and on item 27, we provided staff with feedback on options for funding and development at the Gardner Bakery site. And that's the report out of closed session. I believe that is the end then of our agenda. So I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? Moved and seconded to adjourn. Is there any objection to recording a unanimous vote in favor of adjournment? Seeing no objection, we'll record that vote and we will stand adjourned. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Stefan.